And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
All right, we're back. Cover One, the Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown. Alongside me today on this Tuesday evening quarantine in Western New York, Joe Goodberry of the Athletic Cincinnati. Joe, how we doing, my man?
Doing great, trying to stay safe,
Yeah, man, got to wash the hands. You just ate a steak and cheese sub, so you're feeling good, man. You're on top of the world. We're going to talk Bengals, so everything's going well. We're going to talk some of the free agency that the Bengals have had, and then we're going to talk Joe Burrow, obviously. If that's the guy for the first pick, we'll do some other draft stuff for the Bengals. But let's start with free agency. With what the Bengals have done, what's really been your spin for a team that I thought went, pretty much defensive heavy for free agency?
I mean, even going heavy at all for the Bengals is weird. They don't do that. They don't spend money. So, it was interesting because they kept saying they were. And they kept saying, like, it's not going to be an if, it's going to be how much we spend. And we're like, okay, we're all right. You've said this before, kind of, but never like this. And then they come out and 3 days go by and you're like, yeah, it's the same old stuff, man. They're going to miss out on all the tier 1 guys. And on my list, I had a list of free agents that I wanted. There was a couple tier 1 guys left. And next thing you know, boom, DJ Reader. And then they just go off that with Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Von Bell. And you can tell they were just looking at the defense and saying, we need somebody on all 3 levels. Josh Bynes being the linebacker. And then it's like, okay, I will take this. This is what you're supposed to do in free agency. You get some guys that you're probably going to overpay for, a couple, and then a couple value guys and guys that are 25 years old, and Reader and Mackenzie Alexander, that you think could be cornerstone players as you go forward. So it was just weird to see it, but it's very welcomed.
Yeah, and I mean, do you agree with the contracts that they went with? I mean, Trey Waynes at 3 years, $42 million. DJ Reader at 4 years, $53 million. I mean, do you think that those are good deals for a team? Because I mean, the saying goes, and I kind of believe this: if you spend a bunch of money in free agency, that's not necessarily the ticket to success, because sometimes you can overspend, and really those guys are just trying to get that contract. But those contracts to me seem reasonable by a fair amount. So, I mean, do you really like those contracts? You think they're fair?
Well, here's the thing too. The other part about this overspending in free agency, and I think you have to be accepting of that even going in, right? And that you're gonna pay a little bit more. The Bengals, if you look back at the situation they're in, they go to 5 straight years of the playoffs. They go to 6 out of 7 years, a really strong stretch, and then they whiff on the 2014 and 2015 draft classes. And because of it, it set them back in 17, 18, and 19. And they really didn't have that second group that to just come in with talent, as they lost players, as they lost people on the offensive line, Andrew Whitworth, Kevin Zeitler, Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, more and more guys they lost. And they didn't have the bodies to replace them because they messed up in the draft. So sometimes you got to go out and you got to dive into free agency and kind of fix that. Now, you can never really fix it because you're missing out on the cheap 4 or 5 years you're getting out of those draft classes. But you get Trey Waynes from 2015, who makes up for the Cedric Ogbuehi whiff of a pick, right? So Now, I don't think Trey Waynes is great. I think he is in coverage pretty much the same as Drake Kirkpatrick, which can be frustrating at times. I like guys with more ball skills, can play the ball a little bit better. But he's a better tackler. He's got better long speed. So I will take that trade-off there. I think they overpaid a little bit. I think they could have, or at least I had him pegged as a guy that may get a 1 year, like $10 million deal. Let's kind of prove it deal. But that ended up being Mackenzie Alexander, who I liked more than Waynes, getting the 1 year, $4 million deal. So if you look at them together, that's fair value for the two of them as a pairing. The DJ Reader thing is interesting because I'm not down to pay nose tackles at all. Number one, I don't think they're going to play enough. I think they're situational players at this point. But when you're 25 years old and you're one of the best nose tackles, and he offers a little bit as a pass rusher, playing about 750 snaps last year, he's out there even on third downs, which you can't say for most nose tackles in this league. And even then, I don't even know if you should have him out there. If you have him out there, you probably need to draft a pass rusher at some point because you can probably find an upgrade. But I still like him, and I think he helps Geno Atkins. Atkins hasn't had a running mate like that in his whole career, and he just got named to the all-decade team of the 2010s. You put DJ Reader next to him that's younger, bigger, stronger right now, and I think it's going to free up Atkins a lot more.
For sure. And I like that you mentioned the Mack Alexander deal. I think that's a great 1 year prove yourself type of deal. We've seen it a couple of times in years past. Bradley Roby got it with Houston. So, I mean, those deals happen all the time. I like Alexander quite a bit. So it'll be interesting to see how him and Waynes pair in this defense. And like you mentioned, DJ Reader with Geno Atkins is going to be I think a serious force on the interior defensive line. But as you mentioned, they swung and missed on a couple of previous drafts. We've got the 2020 NFL draft approaching, and they've got a chance to really do right by it. They can get their new face of the franchise, first overall, Joe Burrow out of LSU, an Ohio kid coming home. It just all seems too good to be true. It seems like that's the direction it's going to go. Do you think it's going to be Joe Burrow? Have you heard anything different? Do you think it's going to be anything different?
I think it's 99.9% Joe Burrow, and the only 0.1% is if he gets into a snowboarding accident in the next month or the next 3 weeks. Just because you can never be 100%. The Bengals, I think it was 2014, they drafted a guy who got in a car accident the day before the draft, Dennis Weathersby. I don't know if you remember that from a while ago. I ended up going to the third round. But things can happen leading up to the draft, so it's 99.9. He's going to be their pick. I think they're all ready. All the keys have been turned. They're just waiting to get to that point. And, you hear of, well, the Dolphins, and this started like a month and a half ago. Dolphins really like Joe Burrow. They're going to offer something. And I'm like, the Bengals say they're not trading it. Even Duke Tobin said, I don't see us trading my pick. And then 2 weeks go by. Dolphins want to offer Bengals even more for that first overall pick. And then the Bengals quickly, next time they talk to media, we're not trading it. And then this week again, Dolphins are really going for the Godfather deal is what their reporters are calling it, to get that first overall pick. And then Bengals are like sending Mike Brown and Katie Blackburn, basically the owner and his daughter and de facto GM of the team, are sending out letters. We can't make the first overall pick, start over at quarterback and get it and turn this franchise around. I mean, every sign they're pointing to is we're taking Joe Burrow. We're happy to take Joe Burrow. And here's the thing, like, how many picks would it take to get the Colts to not draft Andrew Luck? Because that's what the Bengals feel like they're doing. And there's not enough picks. They're like, we're not answering the door. We're not answering the phone. You have to blow the whole house up and say, there's 10 first rounders, take it, for them to even consider what the Dolphins would offer.
I agree. I don't see how you pass on a player like Joe Burrow. I mean, I know he won't have, Joe Brady with him as he moves forward. But again, I mean, Zach Taylor, I think, is a pretty good coach overall. And there's plenty to work with this offense, just alone with, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, if he can stay healthy. You have AJ Green. And if Joe Mixon can turn back to what he was last year, I felt like was a little off year, definitely peaks and valleys for sure. So, I mean, I think there's plenty to work with. And with Burrow, I mean, he's too good. The vision is there. His ability to see the whole field. His arm is great. I mean, he can make every single throw on the field, and he's actually a lot more athletic than I think people give him credit for. So I'm excited to see the Bengals turn a new leaf, bring in a new face. And with this, I mean, I wrote an article the other day, last week or so, about building around Burrow with the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think it is a smart move for them to consider in this draft, because I do like some of the interior offensive linemen in this draft. I do like quite a bit of the offensive tackles in this draft. But obviously, we all know it's a historically great wide receiver draft. So, I mean, not necessarily do you agree or disagree, but what are some of the needs for this team as they enter the draft here in a couple weeks?
They pretty much shored everything up on defense. They can still draft a linebacker, but it'd probably be a guy that plays behind Josh Bynes for now, or maybe plays just in the nickel package and replaces Bynes. It could be an edge guy just to give them depth, even though that position's strong. They only have 3 edge guys on the roster right now. So I think we can table defense and say, if it becomes best player available at one of those spots, they'll take it. But I think because of what they did in free agency, they can really attack the offensive side and reload and retool this offensive roster around Joe Burrow. And where does that start? First and foremost, the offensive line's been a disaster since they allowed Andrew Whitworth and Kevin Zeitler to walk in one offseason. They haven't been able to recover from that. They drafted Jonah Williams last year, and he misses the entire rookie year in epic Bengals fashion, because that's what happens when you're down in the dumps. Everything seems to come up that way. And they expect Jonah to be their left tackle. Jonah was a good prospect. I think he'd be in a really good top-heavy tackle class this year. He'd probably be number 3 or maybe number 4, but that's nothing to sneeze at. Those guys are probably all on top 12. So they still like Jonah being their left tackle. They extended Trey Hopkins at center. Other than that, they've got a lot of guys that either they've drafted, they kind of like, they've extended. I think they need competition at both guard spots and right tackle. And how does that come? Where do you do that? Is that at 33? Can you get a guy there? Is Josh Jones still going to be there? I don't think so. Is Austin Jackson going to be there? Is Isaiah Wilson worthy of the pick? Is Cesar Ruiz worthy of the pick? I think he is. So I think they'll have some options there at 33. But I do think receiver is the underrated need on offense. And you look at it right now, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, Auden Tate, John Ross, they're happy with Alex Erickson as the fifth guy. What do you need a receiver for? Well, if you look 1 year down the road, it's just Auden Tate and Tyler Boyd extended or signed in 2021 and beyond. So I think they still would like to get an X receiver to take over for A.J. Green. When we last saw A.J. Green, which now is a year and a half ago, he was playing in the slot a little bit more. He was playing more Z. He was stacking up with Tyler Boyd a little bit more and getting into the middle of the field, not really the deep threat he used to be. And that's okay in this Rams-style offense where they're going to keep guys on moving, condensed formations, and it seems like everyone's a slot receiver at some point during a game. But I think they need the X guy, and that's not Tate, because I don't think he's got the speed or really the ability to win one-on-one. And John Ross has just been too inconsistent. I don't see him as that anyways. I think he's more of a Z in a slot. So Denzel Mims at 33. I think they like him. I think when they've talked about receivers without saying their names, they're describing Denzel Mims. Wide receiver coach Bicknell was the receiver coach at Baylor 2 years ago. That's when Mims had his best year in terms of, I think, route running and catching. He had his most catches that year also. I think they're very aware of Mims. They also coach the Senior Bowl, and I think they're in a lot of Senior Bowl connections. If Mims is there, I would not be surprised if he's the pick. But I think they can go a lot of directions at receiver because it is that type of class. But I think, first and foremost, look at the guy who can play the X position.
I agree on Denzel Mims. That seems like an ideal fit. I don't think he'll be there at 33. Me personally, I think he's.
I don't either.
I think he's a top 25 pick at this point, just with the way he tested at the combine. But would you be opposed to Cincinnati moving up into that range to try to get him if he was available?
They have so many needs still when you look at it as future needs, and only 7 picks. They wanted to get something for Andy Dalton. If they would have gotten a 4th or even a 3rd, whatever, anything, if they would have gotten a 5th for Andy Dalton, I think they'd feel the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible. As of anything right now, I think if the right guy isn't there at 33, they're more likely to trade back than they are to trade up just to acquire more picks.
Right. Now, what about this player, T. Higgins, Clemson? Would you like him at 33, or is that just like Auden Tate 2.0 in your opinion?
I think he's more fluid than Auden Tate. If you just go to the tape, I'm like, okay. Yep. It's kind of hard to separate because you watch the tape all year, you watch these guys live, and you go, T. Higgins is a top 25 pick, and he is going to challenge as one of these top 3 receivers that are really good this year. And then he doesn't dominate in the playoffs or in the final game. He really, he has his moments, but I think, and then from there, when you get to combine and you don't get the testing you want, you don't get the testing at the pro day you're looking for, and it just leaves you wanting more out of him. So you start to scrutinize his tape a little bit more in a stacked receiver class, and I think he could fall into the mid-second round. But I still think he's a good player. So would I be mad if they took him at 33? No, I would not be, because like I said, as an X receiver, I think he's got that. I think he is more fluid than Tate. I think Tate's catching about 50% of his balls in the NFL right now. And that's not all his fault, but his route running isn't great. He ends up in contested situations far too often, where I think the fluidity for T. Higgins, he's compared to A.J. Green at times, because guys that are that big, that tall, don't get in and out of the routes that well normally. Right. But Green does. You see it with Higgins at times, and I think he could be that type of guy.
Yeah, and he's certainly got good body control. So, he brings that presence down the field in big plays, and I think him and Joe Burrow would just be, a clutch duo together, especially for the future. Now, I want to ask this question. The tight end position is obviously, I think, somewhat of a question mark, just simply because CJ, Uzomah is there. I know he's not great, but he's on contract for a little bit of time. I think another 2 years, if I remember correctly. And then you've got Drew Sample, who I really like as far as a great blocker. I got to talk to him at the Senior Bowl. You watch his tape last year. He was a very good blocker. Everything else, they went up and got him in the second round. Kind of question mark there, but this isn't a great tight end class. But is there a tight end that you potentially see them going after? Is that a need for them? Maybe at 107 or maybe even at 65, is there a tight end that you have in mind for them?
I think we talked about Drew Sample last year before the draft on this, and because we both liked him as like a day 3 prospect. He tested pretty well. His hands were really good. I think he had one drop, and he was a really good blocker. We're like, yeah, I'd take Drew Sample as a day 3 pick. It's funny how it ended up shaking out, and all of those guys ended up being either rounds, 3, 4, 5, and 6, whether it was Foster Moreau or Dawson Knox, and the guys that had question marks, but you liked them. And Sample was taken in round 2. And I think it's because they traded back 10 spots. They didn't end up getting the next tier of guys they wanted. A.J. Brown went 1 pick ahead of them. So I think they just said, all right, we'll take Drew Sample because we want him and we have him rated highly. And I think they're still saying he's going to be our Y tight end. And I think they believe he's going to develop into a contributor of this team, and they like C.J. Uzomah, like you said. So they feel okay, and they didn't use the tight end nearly enough. It's one of the reasons why they were okay letting Tyler Eifert go. That wasn't someone they lost. That was someone they said, well, we're going to let him walk this offseason and move on and play with more receivers, get the ball to our running backs a little bit more, and use Drew Sample as a blocker. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But you look at the league, and you look at like the last 2 Super Bowl teams with Kelsey and Kittle at tight end, mid-round picks, super athletes, and then they're dynamic for their offense. Those offenses don't function without those 2 guys. So you should probably always spend a 4th, 5th round pick on an athletic freak tight end. And now I don't know if Adam Troutman's going to be there in the 4th, but I would do that because I look at him as a route runner. And at the Senior Bowl, man, I thought he put on a show and just a big physical guy. And then I come back and I look at the rest of this tight end class, and these guys are all missing something, a piece here or there. And I don't love a lot of them. And then I get to like day 3 guys. And to me, I think Thaddeus Moss is like a 5th, 6th rounder because I think he's going to probably run like a 4.8. And the chemistry he has with Joe Burrow, I would love to take that even if we're talking 4th or 5th round. And I even like Stephen Sullivan from LSU. Josiah DeGuara out of Cincinnati is an interesting guy, a little shorter at 6'2", 250. But I think he's your move type guy that can make people miss and, it has some juice to him. So, yeah, I do think there are tight ends that they could probably take one, but I don't think they're going to force it at all.
Yeah, DeGuara is an interesting one because he moves actually pretty well as a route runner at times, but he, like you said, kind of a guy that you would move, probably play more of that H-back role and just, I don't know, somebody that you would line more in the backfield than anything. But I like the idea of Troutman. I mean, I think he's a pretty good inline blocker. I mean, he's got pretty fluid hips. He put on a show, certainly, at the Senior Bowl. So I like that fit. In my article, I certainly mentioned him too. So, and I did mention Thaddeus Moss just simply because of that chemistry. And he's a guy that blocks his ass off. He's only 6'2", but man, does he know how to block, and he knows how to get his hands inside. So it's going to be interesting there. We'll go quickly through some offensive linemen, and then I'll get you out of here. But with the offensive line, I mean, you made some points that I think that they should look at maybe, somebody on the interior, probably at right tackle as well. Isaiah Wilson makes a ton of sense if he's there at 33. I know the current rumor is that he could be a first rounder, but let's say they do go in the direction of maybe a wide receiver or an interior offensive lineman and then a wide receiver. Is a day 3 guy that you like for the offensive line? Because I feel like the interior offensive line is actually pretty deep. I don't know if there's tons of studs. Obviously, there's no Quentin Nelsons in this draft as far as interior offensive linemen, but there's plenty of good guys from John Simpson and Ben Bredesen out of Michigan. Yeah. There's plenty of good guys. Is there a guy on day 3 that you really like, maybe that fits what the Bengals need?
I was going to say Bredesen, and it wasn't until I went back to watch Ruiz that I gained a little bit of appreciation for him because he's nasty and he's consistent, man. I don't think he has that big negative play. Maybe once every 30 snaps there, I'm like, oh, he got beat. But most of his snaps just come out neutral. And I think you need that for a guy in the interior offensive line. I think he could be a Clint Bowling, who the Bengals had for 10 years that was just solid at left guard for a long time. And that was a 4th-round pick. So I could see that happening. I do wonder where these guys are going to shake out. There's got to be someone still there at the top of 3rd round. We want to keep pushing them up. At first, I'm like, Isaiah Wilson could be there in the 3rd round. And now it's like 1st round. All right, well, someone's got to drop. Is Ezra Cleveland still there? Does Austin Jackson drop a little bit? Does Robert Hunt, I think, could be a guard tackle type guy in Louisiana Lafayette and big mauling guy. I think he actually looks better at right guard. You see a couple snaps of him doing that. And I think if you put him in there, you've got a big, stout right guard. And Bengals really don't have one. You look at their roster, and they want Michael Jordan, last year's 4th-round pick out of Ohio State. They traded up for him. They want him to win that left guard job. He's still young. They think there's upside still with him. He's big body and decently athletic. I think they're going to give him every right to win that job. And then they signed Xavier Su'a-Filo from the Cowboys. and they called him the starting right guard, like, oh, he's going to be the right guard. But he's never played right guard at all. So I thought that was extremely weird that they wanted all the media to know that he was going to be a right guard. And that makes me think like they've got a prospect they want at that spot. And then the other dark horse is Billy Price, former first-round pick. He played a lot of guard last year as he got beaten out by Trey Hopkins at center. Can he be the competition at right guard? So they've got 3 guys that could play, but where do you got to pick? Where do you get a guy that can maybe start at right guard this year and then beat out Bobby Hart in a year or 2 at right tackle? And I think Robert Hunt makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if that's round 3 or 4. I think it might have to be 3 if all these offensive linemen start to get pushed out.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I think at 65, you could certainly see a guy like Robert Hunt. I was watching him over the weekend. I really liked him as far as that ability to slide inside and play right guard. He showed some versatility, certainly just through the game. So he definitely looks more comfortable at right guard. It doesn't look like he has to overthink anything. He doesn't have to worry about the speed off the edge. What's your thought of, and this will probably be my last one, but what's your thought of Tyler Biadasz at 65 if he was there? Is that just another similar Billy Price situation? Because I'll be the first to say I loved Billy Price when he was coming out. I thought he was incredibly consistent. I thought he was aggressive as hell. I thought he was going to be really good. Obviously, health's been a concern, but Tyler Biadasz, he's talked about as maybe being a late day 2 pick, an early day 3 pick at this point, simply because of some health concerns. But would you like him as a potential fit for you guys?
Yeah, I would, and especially if we're talking 65. I mean, I liked Billy Price, didn't love him at 21. And,
yeah,
it's kind of funny because would you roll that same dice again? I've been having this conversation with Bengals fans lately, like they're calling, that guy was a bust. I'm like, was he a bust? And I'm not talking about Price here. It was a conversation about Tyler Eifert. They're like, well, yeah, he was never healthy. And I'm like, well, okay, but he had the ability, or you like what you had. And I think we're probably similar. If you like the prospect, if you evaluate him and you think he's going to be this player, and then in the NFL, he's that player, no matter what happens besides that, that's not a bust. Your evaluation was correct. So I think you would roll the dice on a Billy Price again, especially in round 3. So even if you're saying maybe he's Billy Price and that's, that kind of scares you right now, the value in round 3, 65, and rolling that same dice again doesn't have to land on a 1. This time it lands on a 5, and you've got a very good interior offensive lineman. And I think Tyler Biadasz can definitely be that. And they say he's dealing with an injury last year, so that makes sense when you go back and watch it. If you go back 2 years ago, he looks like a guy that should probably go top 45.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it was 2 years ago, people were saying if he came out now, he was a first-round pick. So it's crazy how much it's changed from then to now with his value and where people really view him. I still think he's top 50, top 60 worthy. So, I mean, if he's there at 65, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I really like him. And I liked a lot of the names that we mentioned, Isaiah Wilson, Cesar Ruiz, plenty of guys I think that are there for the interior and just for this offensive line. I like the receivers that we talked about. That's really all the time I have for you. That's all the questions I have for you. Joe, where can we find you on Twitter, and what are you working on for the Athletic here through the draft process?
Yeah, being freelance, the Athletic kind of cut me off a little bit, but I have one project still in the works, and it's coming out. We have a 10-part series on every single position, and I've got about a 4 to 5 minute video of the prospects I like that I think fit the Bengals and what they typically draft. So look for that. There's coming out one every day for the next 2 weeks.
Cool. You guys, of course, can find him on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. That's GoODBERRY. Joe, my man, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Please be safe out there. Keep beating those subs. Of course, you guys can find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Until next time, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.